Hi, welcome back to my channel. Julian here. This is the July meeting with Stephen. As always, I'm going to put some links to Stephen's stuff in the description. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please drop a comment in the comment section. I just wanted to thank you as well for watching my videos. And with that said, we're just going to jump right into the meeting from here.
You did this drawing and you felt something else.
Yeah, I think it kind of felt like the shadows and the dark halftones got away from me.
How big is the drawing from here to here?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
About the size of my hand.
I wonder if honestly, like for the implements that we're using to render with, if you might benefit from doing your drawings a bit larger.
Larger.
Seems kind of and that wasn't that just more space to have to work on versus the like size of the forms that you're trying to render. About rendering, say, the form at the edge of a nostril, even on a life-size portrait, it can be like quite a tight area to get enough transition into. And in my experience, like if your forms are generally too small, you're from the respect of like having variety in between like your darkest and your kind of lightest, not sorry, lightest, your sharpest and your softest edges. And I just got that sense at the drawing through here, like looking at that cheek and some of the halftones down around the mouth, where I would expect to find like edges in here that were like really soft versus ones that would like sit in a little pocket like this and be really, really sharp. And it seems they're both kind of stuck in this middle space where the sharps don't seem maybe particularly sharp, and the soft edges then are not contrasting against them by being very soft either. So it feels like on both sides there could be some give.
Yeah, that might be because I was trying to, I tried to diagnose the problem myself and I decided the shadow side of the face wasn't dark enough. So I just went through with like a 2B and tried to darken everything.
You know, in general, looking at the planes of the head, I think it feels pretty good. Probably on the edge of the nose, that's an area like on the left-hand side, the left-hand plane of the nose. I think that's a space where you probably over-indexed on looking at the shapes instead of thinking what plane are the shapes on. And as a consequence, the nose itself doesn't seem to have the same form as what we find in the source image. And it's not so much that the shapes are bad, which is an illusion that I kind of labored over or labored with. Anyway, an illusion that I suffered from for years and years was trying to fix my form by fixing my shapes. And those two things aren't necessarily causal. There can be a correlation of good shapes and good form, but good shapes doesn't necessarily create form on its own. I think that's the right use of a causal relationship. So I think that I would tend to skew darker on the halftone here and just give my shapes the space to occupy a kind of plane that turned enough away from the light to be convincing, rather than kind of standing out on its own as just a shape in a light field. And I think that goes for this whole area. In addition to that, I get the feeling that on the light side, there's areas that I would do that also, wherein the values that you're using to kind of define the edge of the plane are giving us the impression that that plane is a little bit too dark in relationship to the other planes around it. Like you could probably get away with it, in fact, if there was just a bit more unity, even if the halftones stayed as dark as they were. It's like there's this central field of like much lighter halftones. Instead of really like a highlight inside of a mid-tone ground, it's like you have lots of light kind of bouncing around, or even you could say it in reverse, a lot of like dark halftones bouncing around on what should otherwise be a relatively light plane. But that unity that you can find in the value can be a stand-in for brightness, right? The guy would landed maybe somewhere here. To me, that makes more sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
So tell me more about this self-diagnosis. What were your thoughts?
My main idea, I think, actually was the idea of unity. The shadows and the light were kind of mixing too much in my mind. And I think that's why I said in the email that I might have picked a challenging pose and lighting situation, because the places where they do blend into each other are, they're a little more difficult than what I'm used to. I'm looking at like the model's right.
Never do that.
Oh,
Not
on the left cheek.
down, but it gets really confusing. So a long time ago, I learned if it's on the left, we just say the left.
Got it. Okay, left cheek. That transitional area is a bit confusing to me, because maybe it's just my eyes, but like the lights there look quite close to the lights on, or the values on the right cheek, at least in the down turning.
I think you might be right about that. I think you might be right that your eyes are doing something funny, because looking at that, I think like the entirety of that cheek could be dropped down. Right now, this is the darkening solution that is keying eventually to like bring up the highlights on this right side. I think that there's another version of this available wherein the shadows themselves are actually not so dark. But I want to go back for a second to talk about like this as a source image, and what it means to have like a challenging source image or not. There is an implicit idea in drawing that we always start with a bias. Now that bias usually for students has to do with an organizational bias, right? So that some schools will focus on shadow and light to the extent that they will completely ignore the idea of like linear structure, for example. And so you have other schools, of course, that will do the opposite to that. They will focus all on structure, and the values, you know, at least from a photographic perspective, will be totally bonkers. Either of these are fine, but it just speaks to the idea that when we're working with a source image, it's only tricky if we don't have the right idea to work with it. Does that make sense? So wrong source image, I think I would fundamentally reject as an idea, just because choosing one that's wrong usually means you're being introduced to the need for a different idea, right? Like a different way to make it work. Does that all make sense, or am I getting too far out there?
No, I think it does. I think the idea is that it's not the source image, it's the ideas that are the idea mismatch.
It's an idea mismatch. That is exactly the way to put it, right? That we have a hammer and we're trying to screw in a screw. And I don't think that that's necessarily what you're doing, but when you mention like how you're keying it, it just reminds me, well, you know, there's like a totally different way that you could key it. I think that that would be a little bit more ideal for a portrait like this. So for example, when I look at this, my first thought was, and I haven't drawn this image, but first thought was how much the darkest dark here stood out from what was around it, shadows around it, which kind of makes me think, well, what if we keyed this with our eyes really wide open, our aperture, for example, very wide open, instead of like squinting down, wherein we would find that all of the darkness would rush out to this edge, which is what you said you did at some point. You thought maybe it needs to be more contrast. You push that shadow edge way darker, which eventually I think just makes the halftone areas a bit more muddy. It kind of forces you actually to do what I just did to it, which is to make all of this halftone quite a bit darker to justify how dark the shadow edge is. Otherwise, it looks weird. Make sense? Then what is the idea? What's the alternate idea? I think that the alternate idea would be actually keeping the shadows notably lighter and allowing those dark accents inside the shadow to be, well, the dark accents that they actually are. And in doing so, you won't need so much halftone on that cheek on the left, because the shadow edge isn't really asking for it. You might need a bit more, but probably not as much as I added in before. And then you'll have the opportunity through here to become, I think, really as soft as that area wants to become, that the painting just looks like a underexposed kind of picture, like everything in the darks is just, oof, just like on 9, instead of what I think is a much more pleasing aesthetic version would be resolving the drawing or the painting with, you know, accented darks inside the shadows. I think that convinces us just as much of like the potency of the light without necessarily that kind of compromising the kind of feeling of halftone in relationship to light. So like, I think that the key to that actually should just be a totally different thing. And then I feel like a lot of the skills that you'd be going for or like utilizing would actually just be fine. It's not that a new source image diminished your skill in portraiture. It's just that the key was forcing your skill into a place that was creating an uncomfortable outcome.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
When you're doing these, looking at a photograph, you'll gain experience also in understanding like, okay, I'm looking at this photograph, I'm thinking of the outcome of the drawing. And there's always multiple positive outcomes, right? I'm a believer that there's many different ways for something to become good. It's not that we just, have to put a rubber stamp on everything with the same exact process every single time. But you should look at your drawing and kind of consider the key of it. How much of the face is in shadow? If a significant proportion of the face is in shadow, it might not be the best thing to key it with your aperture like totally closed. Maybe you really want to open that aperture up. Keep those shadows as light as you can.
I guess I was historically always going a little bit too light. So then this might be the point where I have to stop myself from the corrective measure, which is to make things dark. My thought process here was I saw that the core shadow, there was like a little core shadow, which I like in the source image, because I think that, core shadow and then the reflected light area kind of communicates a lot of form. So I wanted to accentuate that, but then I darkened the core shadow maybe a bit too much. And then I had to bring too many other things down as well.
Yeah, like if you take a really accountable approach to the value application in an area like that, then yeah, you're kind of forced to. It does make a decision for you. Like if you bring your darkest mark into the drawing, let's say here along the cheek, then yeah, it would naturally mean that everything around it should like darken down as well. You also have, to whatever degree you'll be comfortable with this, which I think will be 0%. You'll also have the opportunity to, I think, exploit the rules of realism. I guess I bring this up because there's drawings that I've made, and I know that I've totally changed the overall effect of value. But when you look at these drawings, in no way are you thinking, oh, how unnatural the value looks. As a drawing, it looks realistic. So I guess it leads me to understand that I feel like there is a spectrum to realism, right? That realism is not this sort of monolithic outcome that simply either it all looks the most like realism that it can or not. If it follows certain realistic trends, I think that even something quite unreal can look quite real. So I guess what I'm saying is you do have the option to key that shadow edge however you want, actually without going ahead and forcing you to put those dark values everywhere. It's not even that the whole shadow edge needs to be keyed in the same way. Like I think, for example, the cheekbone is a more dramatic place to add that darkness than say the rest of the shadow is. So I could happily leave a lot of that light and let that passage of the cheekbone kind of stand out, and say the shadow of the nose kind of stand out a little bit more without necessarily making them accountable to each other to say, if X, then Y. What's your discomfort level there, Julian?
Maybe a 6 out of 10. I like the idea, because I think that throughout pretty much the whole time I've been drawing, I've always thought that the reference is the king, that I have to adhere to the reference as much as possible. And as we've talked over, I guess, years now, that's something that I should reconsider.
I think about it kind of like sort of darts. I started out probably thinking that the target for realism was like this, but in fact, like I think that the target for realism is more like that. Like there's a kind of a broad spectrum of like available outcomes that are still realistic. And so while you say that you were convinced the idea that the source image was king, yeah, maybe it doesn't need to be that. Maybe that's a little bit too far. But it's not that we want to like throw it out either. I think good realism is kind of tethered to its subject, but more in the way that like a poet is tethered to their subject, right? Like, for example, if a poet wanted to write about a sunset, well, they would go out and see the sunset, and then they would take away from that sunset the things that they thought were most pertinent, most important to convey what it is. They wouldn't sit in a dark room and just invent a sunset in their poem. What would be the point then of being a poet that writes about a sunset to never experience one? So the relationship then between a visual artist and their source material is that it's vital. It has everything to draw from, but you don't have to take all of it. You take the parts that are essential to communicate in the best way what that subject looks like, or even, if we want to get artistic, to say like what feeling of that subject is.
I think I need to practice keying drawings.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you've ever done this, but something that I've had students do before is to like take a drawing and do two thumbnails with two different keys. So one key like this and one key like that. There's a little illustration in my book actually of this, of one drawing that's conceived of in like three different keys. So like a low key version, high key, and then sort of balance.
Give me 1 second.
I can tell you what page it is.
Okay.
Keying and choices. It's on page 133. Fuck's sake, I read a book that was like 200 pages. Wow. I forgot about that. It's over 200 pages.
I see it. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely investigate this.
So you can, here I take it, I think, from a perspective of wanting to convey the right tone or the right mood for your work. But I think that there's also like a purely technical way to look at it, in the sense that your drawing can be keyed with a wide aperture or a tight one, and that creates just different outcomes.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that as a decision I could make. I thought the decision was made for me by the reference, is what I mean.
I know. Source photography is a bit tricky in that way, that it actually kind of lends itself more to like a finite feeling about how to key something. Find that working from life, the value diversity input through your eyes is just way greater than the perceived version of that in a source photograph. Like a source photograph, in one sense, already has a locked-in aperture. Like not in one sense, like in an actual real sense, it has a locked-in aperture. And in reality, we don't. Our eyes are constantly like shifting and changing to the circumstances we find in the room. So to me, is a more creative feeling space because there's less that feels implicit about it.
I don't think I've ever drawn from life, unless you count still life, like the pairs that I drew the other month.
That's working from life. No, that's, I think, a perfect way to work from life. Also because you're starting with a subject that's not going to be as challenging as something that's kind of constantly moving and breathing and full of complexity. So working from life doesn't have to be as hard as some people make it, right? Like people draw and then they go to work from life in a badly lit studio and they draw the nude for like the first time. And they're like, wow, drawing from life's really hard. It's like, oh, whoa. Like you skipped like 10 steps. Like you're jumping into like nude drawing you've never done, and in a terrible lighting situation with like a clock ticking, a timer ticking down that's like way too short for making a sophisticated drawing. Yeah, that makes it really hard. It's not that hard. It's just something that has to be practiced. I do think also that there is a great benefit to working from life in that it offers you this kind of diversity of experience. So maybe these thumbnail drawings, maybe they aren't from a photograph. Maybe you get a pair, you do two different keys of the same situation, and kind of assess and analyze like, well, what would it be like if I look at it all the time with my aperture wide? What would that do to my darkest dark and my perception of that darkest dark? And then squint down and see how everything kind of bonds together, and all that's left is a little shiny highlight on the surface. These are different experiences that are, I think, crucial to understanding how to do it in more adverse circumstances.
I'll take it upon myself to do that.
Well, what else is going on, Billion? Tell me.
What else is going on? Well, I think the hair was hair's always been a problem for me. I think I might just need more practice. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I need like guidance. I'm not sure.
It was a thing that I noticed the other day. It's like almost it's like a full-on trend, especially among like Florence Academy drawings, and mine included, is that none of them get hair texture. And I think it's partly because making a refined drawing, you probably shouldn't draw everything in the same way. Like fundamentally different than fleshy forms. Why would the rendering of them be the same? Why would you render hair the way that you would render? Because then it will just look like, if you render it the same, then it will look the same, no? And so there's this kind of cutting edge that's typically lacking in these planes. And I won't keep it too abstract for you. I think it's worth even pointing out kind of what that looks like. So taking, for example, like, it's funny, good Florence Academy drawing. I mean, this is even an example of hair that's like drawn pretty well, but it is just a dark mass. You wouldn't say anything there gives you really a sense of like actual hair texture. I'm gonna find one that really hammers home the point, but it should be a drawing. This is a decent example where once again, like the hair is just this kind of mushy space where some kind of texture is implied. I'd love to show you a portrait that had like straight hair in it. But look at this. This is hair that's treated by kind of not treating the hair. And I did that for years. And it can be like successful up to a point. But I think when you end up applying it as you're doing also to a value situation like this one, that actually kind of requires more of you, the tool to solve it kind of isn't there. Does that make sense?
Can you elaborate what you mean by the tool isn't there?
So like, how are we rendering this, right? I think that you're looking at the shadow shape and finding the shadow edge, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're filling in that value, like you do. But that's kind of like what you do to form and flesh, right? Mm-hmm. Solid. I don't think that same thing actually works for hair. It's not the most effective way to draw hair. Where that's a kind of like a value first approach, I wonder actually if with drawing hair, a texture first approach might be like kind of better. So actually going through and finding like what all the individual like movements of that hair are. And then like once we've really gone through and kind of analyzed that, then to take it and say like, okay, what happens when I throw kind of value into the mix? I have a particular drawing I'm thinking of in saying this.
That's interesting because this is how I used to draw hair when I was like a child, is naively drawing each strand. But I'm sure this method is probably not a naive approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, isn't it? Like in between. Let's take a trip back to Instagram really quick, and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. That is maybe more of a balanced way. Like keep this one in your mind, right? Mm-hmm. There, that is, to my eye, completely without texture. And also bear in mind that this is drawn as a painting would be painted, right? Like it's really about light effect and the saturation of value. Whereas, say, a drawing like, and maybe I could even take you through my account and show you a bad one, like a bad version of it, because for sure, I think I did it badly for some time. I think this is like a decent example of how you can use texture and apply value to the texture instead of the other way around, right? You really have like a feeling of kind of nature, the character of hair in that, and it has form and value, obviously. But you have a strong feeling for what the hair feels like, as opposed to the skin that's next to it, which is rendered with a more kind of refined touch.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Let's keep going until we hit bad. I think this is fully a version of hair without texture.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of an implication, a little bit of a hint at it, but it's simply like left more or less without render. And the further you go into value, the further you're confronted by the need for it to either be a thing or not be a thing. I think this is just waiting for the texture that other drawing had. I just didn't have that tool. I was relying on value and shape to do it, but I think at a certain point you can just rely on texture to do it. It's probably worse. Look at this, look at that. Where's the texture? A lot of value, a lot of shape, not a lot of texture. There's like hints at texture, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of hiding a little bit the kind of deficiency in rendering. Now we could all say, oh yeah, it's really nice. And I'm not saying they're shitty drawings. I'm just saying you don't have that texture plus value idea. They have a value and a hope that texture will arrive sometime. Does that explain a little bit better?
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like practicing in that can unlock some of the potential of like what hair should look like, what it can look like, what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah.
Do you think it would be maybe a bad idea to only draw hair as strands and never as like a value block?
Yeah, I guess, when I think about those drawings that I showed you that I was doing that I thought were effective, it's just that the hierarchy changed. It was more about the texture, more about the strands, less about the value. Doing it completely without value, also probably going to run up against not being effective there as well. It's just like which one dominates the design. I think it's tough to hit the sweet spot, but as it is so much in drawing and painting, our ultimate goal is the sweet spot. Like we want to find that method that satisfies like kind of both requirements. By the way, that's a drawing that I really underestimated to myself. When I made that drawing, I thought, oh, it's very deeply average. But I think I was actually really onto something. No, here we are. This one. Yeah, I think that there's like a really good feeling in that hair, the rendering of the features. I always view this drawing as like being unfinished, but I think it very much is finished.
You would say that now.
Yeah, but I don't think I realized it at the time.
And this was made last year, July 1st, 2025.
No, it's probably made before that. Yeah, I mean, I think I made it probably in 2025, probably a couple months before that. Also, because like I said, I kind of always thought of it as an unfinished piece. So it was just kind of sitting in my drawer being unfinished. I also did paint some of the value into that hair as well. Not that that's like significant in the sense that like, you can only do this if you kind of paint it, but you can see the kind of like watermarks kind of passing over that create a different kind of texture feeling. Also, I started integrating like words into my drawings.
Wondering about that, actually.
You were wondering about that?
Yeah, if it was just like a scratch paper that you started drawing on, or if they came after.
No, I think it was a way to try and communicate a perspective, a kind of point of view. So often when we look at things, there's associations, not just the thing itself. Like to truly, as they say, like to cleanse the doors of perception, right, is impossible. So we see a thing as it is, sure, or a person as they are, sure, but we also have all these associated thoughts, feelings, reflections kind of about them. And I guess in this work, I wanted to juxtapose those two things together. This is the way that made sense to me. It's something I'm still kind of quite deeply interested in, and at times I think I don't always find the right solution to it. But it is a way to project our thoughts onto something.
And what are these words on the image?
A lot of them are song lyrics, actually.
Are they?
Yeah, so that one is Polly from Nirvana. And then there's another track. Anyway, Tell No Lies. I'd have to look into it more deeply to remember what all of them are. But I think that's like also part of the joy of it is that like integrating them into the drawing, like they kind of come and go as these like sort of fleeting memories of like a feeling or a moment. And obviously like my drawings at this time were very involved in like what my life was at that time. So I was working in my studio in Norway, alone in the winters, just with music and my thoughts and these source images. There were no models around to work with. So it was a very like intellectual moment. The world existed to me as an idea more than a real thing that I interacted with, in fact, I was like deeply removed from the interactive world, which I later came to be very frustrated by. Yeah, so I guess it was just this sort of like deep kind of introspective space where I just wanted to reflect that somehow in my work.
I think I've done the maybe opposite now. Whenever I draw, it doesn't carry a lot of myself in the drawings that I make nowadays.
Well, you say that. I would challenge that idea. I would confidently challenge that idea. I'm in therapy also because I'm 46 now, and everybody over 40 should be in therapy. I think that there is a kind of a multiplicity in us. Like everybody has this kind of town hall, so to speak, of the mind. And in that town hall, like, the town hall metaphor works because everybody should be listened to at a town hall. You stand up and you can speak. The idea that you might somehow, in your drawing, be able to hide that version of you, I just think is fundamentally not true. It's just a different version of you. And add to that as well that in a learning stage, sure, there will be less overtness in you. But this is the version of you that is a student. This is the version of you that wants to learn. This is the version of you that wants to find out what the definition of a thing is. That is a part of you, an innate, beautiful part of you. You should celebrate that there is a student in you that's consumed with the idea of learning and progress. It's a beautiful, amazing part. It's just not the extroverted images that we have of ourselves, or not extroverted, it's not the word, but the externalized, like, what does it look like when I'm being creative, kind of thing,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because I did that for years. I had this idea that I was like, there were these separate parts, when it's all actually like really muddy and squished together, and impossible to separate your work from yourself at any stage, Even a student who like fundamentally can't draw, you can see either their overconfidence or their insecurity in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you know what I mean. I've surveyed hundreds and hundreds, thousands of drawings, from hundreds and hundreds of students. Your personality comes through in some way. Like, I would say that this shows you to be a very analytical person. It shows you to be somebody also who's able to kind of carry through ideas. You can see when somebody is so easily distracted that their kind of focus falls apart, or that, for example, from one drawing to the next drawing, they've leaped on to like a totally different idea. Like, you're a very consistent person also. And you may feel that and you may not feel that, but your drawings kind of make evidence of that. Or at least the version of you, that part of you, that person in that town hall, that person is like that.
That's a fair point. I think you've successfully rebutted my my statement.
Yeah, I think as I've gotten older, that stuff has like gotten a lot more important to me. I think as it does with everybody, we all kind of go through these different kind of phases in our lives where we prioritize different things. And I think, especially getting older, kind of meaning and purpose they come to the forefront of what you're doing, because you kind of start to realize that if there's no meaning in this, I'm not going to waste my time on it. And so if it is something that's kind of consumed the better part of your life, you should have answers for these questions, It's actually why I think the artist statement is so important to get good at. Not because the gallery wants it, but because it's a way for you to kind of self-reflect and say, these are actually the things that matter to me. Yeah. Like a corporation or a company doesn't have a mission statement because it's fun or cool, it's like show it to other businesses. It's so that they can make decisions.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, what do we believe in? How do we make a decision? It has to have something at the core of it. And if you don't have that, you'd be lost at sea.
I think the way that I used to see myself in my drawings was the subject. So I used to draw shows that I liked, like cartoons at the time, and people that I liked, like my teachers, my classmates, and musicians that I liked, which is kind of harkening back to your podcast, which I hadn't actually gotten to see yet. You're drawing musicians, but nowadays it's Junyi and Emma, and not to say that they're not fun and enjoyable to draw, but I don't know them.
Somehow I got very used to it. My girlfriend Gaia, like, she's not an artist and only modeled. Really, like, I was the second modeling job working for me. It was the second modeling job she'd ever had. Like, the idea of, like, what is it to, like, work with models? Like, what does that mean? Working in the academy for so long, really, they were just a form to put some light on. Like, I hate to say it. You start to look at them, like, very objectively, like, do they have good shapes? Do they have a good proportion? They're more of like a formal problem than they are. I think when we think of portraiture commonly, it's like, you would inevitably make that portrait something you really care deeply about. But like, that model that I showed you the drawing of just now, I worked there for about 7 years. I barely knew anything about her. Like, she just had a proportion and a look that worked for me, and so I worked with her. It was it. I mean, it was never more than that to me, which I guess, like, on the outside, probably that like sounds strange, because we do have such a strong association between what our subject is and what we care about. But somewhere in academia, that those two things separate, and we look at it maybe more clinically, for lack of a better word. It's not to say that it shouldn't like swing back the other direction. I mean, I have experienced that engaging with a subject that you obsess about, that you are passionate about, that you're involved with, like, is different. It's just a different experience. But we changed the drawing, the key of the drawing. And I think it's significant just to say, it's basically where you let your darks be and what that causes the focus to be on, but also how you get there. I think the other thing to know about keying this in the way that I have is that actually, I think that this area and this area are actually keyed with kind of two slightly different keys to them. That the darkness that you have in the shadow here, according to the source image, should be the same as the one that you have here, but we've kind of negated that, right? But I do think it serves the composition in the sense that my focus is here in the eyes, here in the nose and the lips, and less here because there's less contrast here.
I gotta start stepping back from directly, or maybe not mindlessly, but without as much thinking, to following the reference.
Well, we're introducing new ideas here, new options for you, new things that you can use to judge with. So, yeah, by all means, integrate them, but by no means should you feel like it's not that you're on autopilot. We're just adding new things to the menu. When you get into the shadow, like you are here, I think the space that you define that darkest dark in can be a little bit more nebulous. Meaning it doesn't need to be like an outline like that. In fact, I think an outline like that probably risks to make that passage too clear, more clear than it needs to be for what it is. And kind of, it not only steals attention, but in its attention, it requires like more design from you. You could be more generalized and better, actually, which is really a rare kind of overlapping Venn diagrams to be less specific and be better for it. You see what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. Because I thought that was it was a good thing to be specific there as kind of like a grounding.
It's good to have a value there. I think the specificity of that shape, though, applies a level of importance that it just doesn't have. I guess if I had to lay it out, I would say like this is where my. So all right, I'm gonna do a YouTube video. I'm gonna make $1,000 drawing prize, explicitly so that I can guide a conversation around what I actually think really good drawing is. Because I feel like so many competitions, massively over-index on hyper-realism. If it looks like it took 100 hours, that wins. And I just don't think that's what drawing's about. In fact, I think it's like almost anti-drawing. Now that's a very bold claim, but that's what YouTube's for. But things like this, where I think the level of specificity, in fact, detracts from the drawing. Like specificity in itself does not have an intrinsic value. It's a thing that you use where it matters, and simultaneously you don't where it doesn't. I don't know any other art form where there isn't a kind of like balance of focus like this. In film, we want you to look at the main characters. The trash can 50 yards behind them isn't in the same focus. Why would it be? It's a fucking trash can. In music, like there's a balance to like the like how different parts of the orchestra play at different parts of the composition. So one part is swelling and becoming the main theme, and other parts are quieting down so that that can be felt more deeply. Like every art form does this. So I just think drawing also has that capability. Painting has that capability. I think it's usually overshadowed by something that just overtly looks like a pain in the ass to do. There you go. That's the end cap for this month's YouTube, I think.
Yeah. Strong statements.
All right, Julian.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to all the other stuff you're going to do, podcasts, contests, whatever.
Yeah, the contest is going to be. I got to make several videos about it, I think. All right. I'll see you next month. Cheers.
See you, Stephen. Cheers.